Hi, I'm Steve Clemons, and I have a question. How shipwrecked and hopeless is America's Democratic Party? Let's get to the bottom line. After its resounding defeat in the last election, the Democratic Party has been desperately searching for a way forward. We're talking focus groups, consultants, soul-searching, you name it. The party ran on a tone-deaf platform celebrating the status quo last year, not recognizing the American people wanted radical change and not more of the same. But months later, the Democrats still don't look like they have a plan for the future, with polls indicating they're at a 30-year low in popularity. And if Democratic supporters thought their party would stand up as the main opposition to Trump, they've been disappointed thus far. So how did the party that used to represent working-class Americans and the civil rights agenda sink so low and lose touch so fast? And how can it unite if it's still undecided whether to shift more to the right or to the left on issues such as immigration or social justice and Palestine? Today, we're talking with Joan Williams, distinguished professor and founder of the Equality Action Center at the University of California College of Law. And she's author of Outclassed, How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. Joan, thank you so much for joining us. I have your book here. Let me just ask you an obvious question right up front. Is it as easy as a light switch to turn on and off after the Democratic Party has essentially lost the working class, as you argue, for them to get them back?
It's not as easy as a light switch, but it's not as hard as it's making them, Steve. It's there's a very clear path forward. First of all, is to understand why people are so angry. If wages had continued to rise when productivity did, like they did in the years after World War II, wages would be 43% higher than they are today. And for that and a host of other reasons, basically every American used to do better than their parents. But of those born in 1980, only about half will. People are just beside themselves. There's been a really radical inequality of income growth, and it's between individuals, but also between regions. So many regions of the country feel left behind. And what this has done is it's fueled economic populism. And there's really two different kinds of populism. One is left populism. They're robbing you blind. The other is right populism. They're looking down on you. And what the Democrats need to do very simply is lean in to left populism and stop reinforcing right populism by stopping calling people who certainly things like deplorables, but also the focus on defense of democracy. Although we need to defend democracy, we need to understand that what you need to do to defend democracy in the short term is really different from what you need to do to defend it in the long term. In the short term, you need to do everything we're doing, resistance in the streets, in the courts. But in the longer term, what Democrats need to do is to reconnect with this economic anger of these fragile and failing middle-class people and connect that with the growing anger of younger, even college-educated voters who can't afford a house, can't afford childcare, often can only get short-term or gig work. There's a lot of economic anger out there, and that's the first step. And then the second step is to turn the wedge cultural issues into bridge issues. And there's a very simple formula for that, Steve.
Wasn't the writing already on the wall that if they kept this up, the Democratic Party was in fact going to lose workers?
Well, neoliberalism was a wild and sexy dream. It was the dream that capitalism would transform China into a democracy much like us, that every nation would produce what could produce most efficiently, and it would rise all boats. And you know what? It didn't rise all boats. What it turned into is pitting the fortunes of middle status workers in industrialized democracies against the poorest workers on the planet and seeing whom capitalists wanted to hire. That wasn't going to end well, and it didn't end well. Neither did creating an economy where hugely disproportionate amount of the country's wealth went to a relatively limited number of superstar cities, leaving huge areas of the country left behind. So I think that one of the things that Democrats need to focus on is they have often been very focused on the poor and helping the poor through redistributive programs, which as a Democrat, I think are really important, but those redistributive programs are very different from what the traditional people in the middle want. They don't want government redistribution. They want a job that pays the bills. They want a job that gives them dignity. And this is, the Mamdani campaign in New York has been so misinterpreted from both the right and the left. But basically what Mamdani said is that, and this is almost literally a quote from his victory speech, he said, hard work should yield a stable life. And I think that's what the relatives that you're talking to want. That's what younger college grads want when they can't afford a house and they can't get a steady job. That's what these middle status voters want, who have veered towards the far right, not only in the United States, but also throughout Europe.
When you speak about Mamdani and the remarkable success he has had thus far, and he's not elected yet, but he's way ahead of the packet, he may come in. There are lots of folks organizing against his potential success in becoming the mayor of New York. I mean, I don't think you can run both in New York and West Virginia, but how do you bring a party together that's going to need to somehow appeal to people across those geographic and economic lines?
I think you can run, Steve, both in New York and West Virginia on the same message. Hard work should yield a stable life. And that's what we as Democrats are going to deliver. Now, that is not a centrist message. And in fact, it's a left populist message. So the formula for these middle status voters is that they're very progressive economically, but they're quite conservative culturally. And that is a formula that the challenge for Democrats, the idea of being quite left economically and making sure that anyone who works hard can achieve a stable standard of living, that should not be divisive at all among Democrats. The challenge for Democrats is how to proceed on some of these cultural issues. But there is a formula for how to proceed on cultural issues, how to, again, turn these wedge issues into bridge issues. If you understand the basic values that motivate these middle class folks, blue-collar values reflect blue-collar lives. And Democrats have to learn, again, how to connect with blue-collar values and how to communicate the logic of those lives to the college grads who now hold so much sway in the Democratic Party.
Joan, the Democratic Party, to some degree, still seems to be, I don't know, in my view, kind of, controlled by these longtime institutionalists. So I guess it's, an age-old question. Does the establishment need to be shaken up? Does a bowling ball need to be rolled into them by these folks and challenged and shaken to get to the place you want to be, which is with some of these new, younger voices?
You're talking to an aging hippie, an aged hippie, I should say. So does the establishment need to be shaken up? Always. That is always true. But I also think the establishment and the whole Democratic Party has to come to terms with the really historic lack of popularity right now of the Democratic Party. There was just another article in the New York Times about how unpopular the Democratic Party has become. And again, I think people are making this too complicated. I think that you certainly, this populist economic message that focuses, we're not going to abandon the poor. We are Democrats. That's not what we do. But a focus on the poor does not, and on redistribution, does not replace a focus on the middle class and what's called predistribution. Again, as I keep saying, this is not complicated. Hard work should pay off in a stable life. And you should be able to afford health insurance. You should be able to afford a house, a nice, simple house. And not only are people in the middle, the fragile and failing middle class, they feel they can't get that, but younger generations of college students can't get that. And then on cultural issues, I actually am just about to begin writing a report that will show how Democrats and liberals and progressives can forge cross-class coalitions on cultural issues, rather than messaging those cultural issues in a way that just serve to empower their opponents. And I'll just give you an example, which is climate change. If you work outside for a living, it's 117 degrees out there. You can't work in your auto body shop. You can't work as a gardener. You can't work as a farmer. Farmers can't grow what their grandfathers grew. That's a way to message climate change that's going to connect with some of the central concerns of blue-collar people. And on immigration, for example, immigrants are working class people, just like these working class voters who Democrats have lost. They are hardworking, they have family values. These are people who share your values. That's incredibly important. Also, really important is middle status people in all hierarchies. They're more traditional, they're more conventional, and they really value order. These are order takers in their jobs. And they figure, if I have to follow the rules, other people should have to follow the rules. And so the fact that it was not Democrats, it was Republicans who opposed the legislation that was going to create order at the border, that is something that you should be hearing from Democrats over and over again. It is possible to build these cross-class bridges on these cultural issues. You just need the formula, and the formula is crystal clear.
Let me ask you another thing as part of the new landscape of reaching out and listening politically. The Democratic Party paid about $20 million reportedly. A friend of mine helps run the thing about, the what's it called, the project, or to speak with American males in this. And so in that $20 million, I'm sitting here saying, hey, here's a $30 book that pretty much says much the same thing. And just wondering, why don't we just get more books and send these out? But what is going on in the question of gender and this concern that males, in terms of our social equation, are defecting and leaving the Democratic Party in droves and joining up with President Trump, with the Republicans, wherever they may be? There seems to be something subterranean going on there.
It's not subterranean, Steve. It's right at the surface. If you look at what Americans believe, and this will shock some people, but most Americans, and certainly most men, believe they should be providers. Now, we've created an economy where, again, it's really hard to get a stable middle-class job. All your factory closes. Now the AI is pushing you out. It's very hard for males to fulfill that provider role. And what the studies show is that when men are blocked from traditional ways of expressing masculinity, they tend to double down on masculinity and go like hyper masculine. And that's one of the ways they go hyper masculine now is the manosphere and voting for Trump. That's a way of saying, I may not be a provider, but I'm a real man. You know, again, the answer is so simple, and some Democrats are already doing it. There's a lot of talent in the Democratic Party. Ruben Gallego, for example, from Texas, who won in an election that he shouldn't have won. What he said to, and I think he ran 30 points ahead of Kamala Harris among men, among Latino men. What he said to them was something super simple: is you should be able to support your family and get your troquecito, which is sort of Spanglish for your truck, or pickup truck. And I'm going to help you do that. I'm going to help you be a provider. How hard was that? That was not hard. The other thing to recognize is that when that provider role is blocked, men for whom it's blocked tend to go to another very valued masculine role, the protector. This is what shapes the politics of gun control. The politics of gun control are all about masculinity. And that should inform, even calling this gun control, such a bad move, such a bad move. This is about whether fathers can send their 6-year-olds to school without fear they'll get shot and murdered. If you are a good protector of your family, you want some sane gun policies to protect your family. Again, these things are not hard once you know the formula.
There seems to be a collapse of trust. I don't know how to say it, sorry for the complicated word, but like in empiricism, in the Enlightenment, in the way in which we used to think of reality, where conspiracy theories are much more part of the way we communicate and think, and people seem to be absorbing that. And I'm just interested in whether or not you can actually move forward in society if you don't have bedrock science. I mean, there just seems to be disappointment in science, data, all of that stuff at the same time. I'm wondering where your head is on how conspiracy theory developments fit into this.
Well, 2 words: social media. Longer description: inequality predicts distrust in institutions. And so the fact that we have so much distrust today in government, in public health authorities, in the media, in all mainstream institutions, and we have sky-high levels of distrust, that is an artifact of this huge growth in inequality that we've been talking about. Now, how do you counter that? And conspiracy theories, they're really, one scholar called them a weapon of the weak. They're a way when you think, I've really gotten screwed. Why am I getting screwed all the time? Pardon the language. I'm going to do my own research and I'm going to find out. This is elites who are rigging the system against me. And at some level, elites have rigged the system against people, so that's true. Now, typically people get the wrong elites rigging the system in ways that didn't actually happen. But the central thrust is society isn't fair. No matter how hard I run, I can't even stay in place. Some people are getting wildly rich and I can't even keep my head above water. All of that is literally true. It's shown by the economics. It's the fancy name for it is the elephant curve, that by globalization, millions of people were lifted out of poverty, mainly in Asia. And the people who paid the price were middle status people in advanced industrialized democracies, just the group that feels screwed and is veering to the far right. And so the answer is to do what Trump has done, connect with that huge economic anger and take that anger somewhere far more promising to actually help these people than Trump is taking it. Because what Trump is doing is raising prices for them.
So just finally, I'm fascinating conversation, so thank you. But as you sort of watched the rise of political notables like Elizabeth Warren, Senator Bernie Sanders, AOC, Zoran Mamdani, you know, that's a very clear part of the Democratic picture right now. But I'm also hearing something else from you, that even despite the rise of some of those individuals, a lot of people have lost and left. And so when it comes to things like climate change and guns, gay rights, civil rights in general, advocacy on abortion, do some of these stars, et cetera, need to moderate their views? Do they need to move to the right, or does the party need to move to the right somewhat to recapture those working class Americans that have been lost?
I don't think so, Steve. I think the working class Americans want a left economic agenda that ensures that workers have rights, that you can't be made to work full time for some place and called an independent contractor and not given benefits. They want an economy where you can't, this is a widespread practice, they're called trap agreements, where the employer trains you and then charges you for your training. And if you quit, charges you sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to repay them for training. These are exploitative policies, classic policies that the left has always stood against. I think what you're saying, though, with respect to the cultural issues, is where I wouldn't say that Democrats need to go to the center, but they need to understand that the way they sometimes formulate these issues, immigration, abortion rights, gun control, even climate change, the way they formulate those issues is a way that makes sense within the life of the professional managerial elite. And it does not make sense. Blue-collar lives create blue-collar values, and that if Democrats want not to be looped by cultural issues to be wedge issues that work for Republicans, they have to learn how to listen respectfully to blue-collar values and connect with those values.
Well, I'm going to be very interested to see whether the leadership in the Democratic Party reads your book well, watches its show, and gets its act together. University of California, San Francisco Law School professor Joan Williams, and author of this fascinating new book, Outclassed: How the Left Lost the Working Class and How to Win Them Back. Really appreciate you joining us today.
I appreciate the conversation. Thanks for the invitation.
So what's the bottom line? An ancient warning rings true about the Democratic Party in the United States. Pride goeth before the fall. Gone are the days when hope could win elections. That's now been replaced by fear. The Democrats, well, they wanted tolerance for themselves, but they've been intolerant of those who felt differently about climate or about economic fairness or even about the empowerment of rising racial minorities in the country, especially as whites slowly lose their majority status in the country. The tension between contending poles inside the Democratic Party remains totally unresolved, in my view, directionless. And this gives their political competition a lot of wins on the battlefield. Until the structural incoherence of the Democratic Party changes, Republicans are going to keep winning. Unless, of course, they eventually become structurally incoherent as well. And that's the bottom line.